Hi, everyone. Today we're going to go ahead and review the scientific method. So this method should be something familiar to you as it should have been taught somewhere in your schooling life. So the scientific method, as we see, is an ongoing process, and it's something that we actually do on a day-to-day basis. So our key concept is that science is a way of thinking, questioning, and gathering evidence. Our essential question is, how is a scientific method used to solve a problem? So there's certain steps in the scientific method. It's very ordered. We start off with some sort of observation, something that we see, something that we hear, something that we notice. We ask questions and we form a hypothesis. Our hypothesis is our guess from whatever we saw or whatever we observed. Next, we experiment. We collect our data. We analyze the data, we form our conclusion, and then we retest. Here's a video on the scientific method. You guys can go ahead and look at this on your own. I would highly advise that you watch this. It should help you guys out. But let's start off with the first step, observations. Whenever we observe something, we gather this through our senses. So a scientist notices something in their natural world. They see something that allows them to kind of question, what is it that they're looking at? So an example of an observation might be noticing that many salamanders near a pond have curved and not straight tails. So we're at a pond. I noticed that there's a lot of salamanders, but I noticed that not all of them have straight tails. Some of them have curved tails. So that would be some sort of observation, something that I can see what's going on. Next, we generate what's known as a hypothesis. And our hypothesis is a suggested solution to a problem. It must be testable, and it's written as an if-then statement, and it helps to predict the outcome. So what is it that you predict is going to occur? Why is that happening? Here's another example of a hypothesis. So if we're using our salamander example again, our example would be, an example of a hypothesis might be that the salamanders have curved tails due to a pollutant in the moist soil where they live. So that's just a guess. Based on my observations and based on everything I'm seeing, I'm going to go ahead and guess that the reason why the salamander has a curved tail is because there's some sort of pollutant in the soil. Next, I want to form what's known as an experiment, or I want to conduct an experiment. And an experiment is a procedure to test the hypothesis. So now I want to see whether my hypothesis is correct or incorrect. And to do this, I formulate an experiment. Now, within our experiment, we have this term which are known as variables, or we have items which are variables. And a variable is the factor in the experiment that is being tested. A good or valid experiment will only have one variable. Okay. So whenever we're doing an experiment, we only want to change up one thing in our experiment. We don't want to change up multiple items. If we change multiple items, then now we are looking at different factors that can affect the outcome of the experiment. So in this instance, we change one thing. Now, as we can see in this example here, I have a plant. I have one that has 0 drops of fertilizer. I have one that has 2 drops of fertilizer. I have one that has 4 drops and 6 drops. And if I were to guess, I could say that this experiment here is testing whether fertilizer, has an effect on growth. So some scientific experiments follow rules. So it's just not a free-for-all. There are specific rules whenever we experiment. So an experimenter is going to change one factor and it observes or it measures what happens. So I change one thing and then I measure how that change affects my results. So one of our variables we're going to learn about are known as the control. The control variable. So this is when the experimenter makes a special effort to keep other factors constant so that they will not affect the outcome. Those factors are called control variables. So these are the items that stay the same. These are the items that stay the same. I don't change anything different to this variable. What is the purpose of a control? Well, controls are not being tested. They're used for a comparison. Okay, so we use them as a comparison group to see if the thing or the item that we change to the experiment has an overall effect. So let's take a look at this example here. So I have one which I'm watering with different amounts of water and one without water. And as I can see, when I go over to the next example, I see that obviously the one plant sprouted seeds because it had water, whereas the plant that didn't have seeds did not sprout any seeds or did not have any water. All right, other variables. The factor that is changed is known as the independent variable. The factor that is measured or observed is called the dependent variable. So these terms in red you have to know. So we talked about the control. Now we're going to look at the independent and the dependent variable. So the independent variable is the thing that I change, and the dependent variable is the measurement. How do I measure it? So let's look here. I see that in this example, we are looking at different types of liquids to water each plant. And what I'm measuring is the growth. So I'm saying that if I change the liquid, then the plant will grow differently. The measurement of the plant growth is going to be the dependent variable, whereas the independent variable is going to be the type of liquid used. Since I changed the different type of liquid, that means that the growth is expected to change as well. And that's how I'm going to measure whether the liquid worked or not. All right, so here's some example of controls and variables. So for example, suppose you want to figure out the fastest route to walk home from school. You will try several different routes and time how long it takes you to get home by each one. Since you're only interested in finding a route that is fastest for you, you will do the walking yourself. Well, why wouldn't you have a friend walk and you time them? The reason why is because obviously your legs are different heights. So some have longer legs, some of you guys have shorter legs. So you'd want to make sure that you are the one doing the walking and not your friend. Varying the route in this instant is the independent variable. The time it takes is going to be the dependent variable. Why? Because I'm looking for the shorter distance. So that means if I change the route, the time that it takes is going to be my measurement. Keeping the same walker throughout makes the walker a control variable. All right, when we talk about valid experiments, one more thing is that it's best to make several trials with each independent variable. Why? Why don't I just want to test this one time? So like we said, to be a valid experiment, two groups are required, the control and the experimental groups, and there should be only one variable. Here's a brief video on the independent and dependent variables. You can watch this on your own. It's a very cool video using Mythbusters. All right, next we're going to look at data. That's the results of the experiment. So whenever we're doing an experiment, like we said, we have to collect data. Now there's two types of data we can collect. It can either be quantitative or qualitative. They must be organized, and it can be organized into charts, tables, or graphs. So when we look at quantitative data, that means that I'm looking at some numerical values. When I'm looking at qualitative data, qualitative means like I'm using my senses or I'm observing. Like if I'm observing behavior. Behavior can't be measured, but it can be written out in a journal or it could be observed. That would be qualitative data. And then finally, we form our conclusion. Once we gather all of our data, we analyze it, and then we can form a conclusion. And that is the answer to the hypothesis, which is based on the data obtained from the experiment. Now, once experiments are carried on over and over and over, and we completely get the same example over and over, we get the same conclusion over and over, scientists can then form a theory. And a theory explains a wide range of observations. So a theory is supported by a wide range of scientific evidence. Theories can change based on new evidence. So here's a brief video on theory versus law. I guess one of the most important theories that we can talk about would be the theory of natural selection. Okay, so that means that it's almost 100% all the time, but we don't like to say anything is 100% fact because in science, things are always changing. New evidence can appear, which can then alter the theory. All right, folks, that is it for today. These were just notes on your scientific method. Hoping you guys learned something new. And next thing is we'll be applying this method. So you guys have a great day.